So it would look like actually just going out of the body, disassociating, and not being there at all.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a brilliant process because it allows us to not feel pain. It allows us to not store memory. It allows us to not be present in those really dangerous situations. And so, yeah, this shows up again with the PTSD, where say you are in the military and there's this crazy thing happening and there's bombs going off. Oftentimes, you just won't be there.
Wow.
Your mind will leave the body, and it's a survival mechanism, right?
Yeah.
You go into this freeze mode, and so people will say, well, I could have done more. I could have helped him. I could have been there, and they feel guilty about it. But the truth is you couldn't. Your body was so brilliant that it left the building in order for you not to feel the pain, and not to process the emotion, and not to store that whilst you were in that situation.
So welcome on the show, Johannes. I'm so glad to have you here. I know you do so many different things, but I think one of the main things that you have been focused on over the last couple of years is definitely the breathing technique, and really perfected that, as well as going into an ice bath and getting certain modalities going and experiencing, I guess, amazing performance, not only of the body, but especially of the mind. So I would love to talk about all of that to you if we have the time today. So
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So how did you get into that? You probably didn't do the normal going into yoga, going deeper, a little bit deeper, and eventually ending up with breath. What was your way to these modalities?
Yeah, bits and pieces. And I'd like to say that it came out of just, that divine inspiration, and I just wanted to find more, but it's more a path of desperation, if anything. Like, I really needed it. And so it's one thing that I really struggled with throughout my childhood and my early 20s and things like that, was the self-regulation. So, managing myself through the day, managing my states, managing my emotional states, and just the way I felt, and therefore like the way I reacted to people and to the world around me. And I really had a hard time with that from early on. And I think that when I found breathing in particular, and it's going to start with me doing more yoga and then the route of freediving, which really helped me look inwards and use different practices like that. But that was the biggest thing for me, getting some control and with it some knowledge, some understanding of things like my nervous system and like how my brain works and how it regulates with the world outside of me, and therefore how I come into being and how I sort of manifest my life and my experiences.
Yes. So before you found that, like, what would be a typical thing that you would say went really wrong in your life? Like, would it be like, I could think like for myself, it would be probably binge TV, or, play a lot of computers, or taking drugs. Would you say that was sort of what it is, or other things?
I'd say so. So I would say overwhelm is a common denominator. I felt since a kid that life was overwhelming. Yeah. Right. It was always too much. I couldn't sort of deal with it. Right. And in the classical school system, like we have in Europe or sort of any Western country, that didn't really work out. So then there was cases of like ADD and ADHD and prescription medication and all these kind of tracks that you don't really want to go down. And it's also not really helpful for a kid in those states. So it just almost always ended up with me being reprimanded in certain ways, or standing out, or being different, or having extra assistance, or causing problems, right? Causing constant problems. And with a personality like mine, who's sort of a natural leader in those shapes too, it's causing problems for other people, right? And sort of having that infect stage, right? And sort of always coming into situations and doing sometimes more harm than good as I came in. And then, the results that brought me through doing that. And I think that some things in there I don't want to change, and they're not necessarily there for me to change, but it's about flipping more of a positive light on it.
Yeah.
I'm still affecting a lot of people, just not infecting them so much, and sort of bringing myself into situations, but with a bit more of a positive light and just a bit more of an honest way of looking at things.
Yeah, a bit, hey? Yeah. So how did you get to it? Did you just see a poster at one stage on the side of the road? Is it like, this will change your life?
No, good question. I think a big place where it shifted for me was learning the Wim Hof Method, was really getting deeper into that practice in particular. And I found it when I was actually dealing with a lot of sort of personal tragedy. I had some traumatic experiences, really, and I couldn't really share. That was one thing that...
You couldn't shower?
I couldn't share.
Oh, share?
Share, yeah. Just as a young man, I couldn't speak about what was going on for me in my life. Yeah. I couldn't openly sort of share and digress those kind of things that happened to me, right? So I was carrying it. I was carrying it very physically. I was almost somatically holding on to some of these issues in the tissues, as you might say, right? And then I didn't have a method of dealing with that. And then when my brother actually introduced me he was working for the first cryotherapy studio in Amsterdam. This is
oh, wow.
5 years ago or so. And he introduced me to that practice, right? Where you get really cold and you really get into your body, right? And I remember being in that cryotherapy studio, and I think it's minus 120 it was, and you're standing there like fully in this big freezer. And I just remember my tears freezing onto my face.
Yeah, wow.
Because it broke down some of those layers that I was holding onto. And then the same with the breathing practice that sort of accompanied it. It actually opened me up in a certain way, and it allowed me to process emotion. And then that became my own practice. That became something very personal. That became something I actually started doing every single day, because it was my only way to tune in, right? And to get some of that self-regulation and to just get a connection to something deeper within. And then slowly from that, I started sharing it with other people and talking more about it and bringing it into different practices and different situations, up to the point where it became a group practice. And then I think that's really where the magic happened, because then you do get to share and you do get to express and you do get to see yourself reflected onto other people. And now, and speaking about these things openly and teaching it to other people on sort of a large basis, it's just evolving.
So can you see other people in a similar space when they come to you, where they, whatever they can't share, or whatever, then would you say that if you can't share, you're actually not in touch actually with that yourself, and therefore it's not really, it's so hidden because you actually don't touch it yourself? Or do you know why you don't?
It's a good question. I think we're not really taught in our Western ways or in school about how to open up and how to speak about emotions. And you know, the culture that we're from, Germany and the Netherlands, sometimes not very different.
No,
can be quite stoic, right? And can be quite inward and quite a heady sort of way of doing things and talking about life, right? So my parents weren't the greatest example. The people around me at school weren't the greatest example. So I never really learned those things originally. But in terms of who this attracts, and the range of people is very big, but more recently what I've been sort of interested in and who I've worked with quite a bit are people that are sort of ex-military here in Australia and in America and the United States too. Yeah. So PTSD is a big topic that I'm very interested in, and
traumatic stress.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. And, you know, with PTSD, we automatically think about the two big things, which are rape and military, right? Those are the two things. But in research, it's actually been shown that 56% of PTSD cases are actually related to personal tragedy, right? And that means that it's not just those extreme situations. It means that we all deal with these tragedies, right? We all deal with trauma, and we all deal with unprocessed emotions and things. And I do think that sharing, kind of what we were saying, is important with these cases, and bringing it from that space of where it's just me and it's hidden and it's guilt and it's shame into an open space where it's seen and it's vulnerable, and you realize that it's actually not just me. It's actually all of us.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. No, we had a suicide recently in our family, and it was amazing how many people actually had experienced it, but not necessarily dealt with it, which meant that when people, you know, wanted to comfort us, there was also that whole layer that came out in them actually having experienced it and sharing what they experienced. And talking to you right now, I'm thinking maybe they had never really, or only to a really small degree, really shared what that meant, but now they had something to relate to, and so they did. But I definitely relate to how many more people there are that have some or other issue that is actually quite impacting on their lives.
And not just on their lives. Like the sad thing about cases of PTSD or trauma in any way is that it affects everybody around them. It affects the community at large, and therefore affects everybody, right? So we all get affected by these situations. But to sort of bring it full circle, what that might look like in the line of work that I do is that initially we teach people some of these breathing methods and some of these things like the cold exposure and getting out, connecting to nature, right? Learning to breathe, learning to process some of these emotions through that. And not everybody needs that, but it's beneficial for everyone. And then it starts to open up some of these vaults and some of these things, and we see people, you know, people cry sometimes when they do practices like breathwork, and it really gets them in touch, and it also gets them to a calm, beautiful, like tranquil state, which they might not have experienced for a very long time, right? And it's always the right place to then move from and then have some of these conversations. And I think that's something that I'm quite passionate about. Especially in my retreats and programs like that, where we bring people into nature, into that secluded environment, and we do a lot of these practices. We do a lot of breathwork, and we do a lot of immersions into nature, you could call it. And then we also have very honest, open conversation. And it seems to just be a really good, it's a really good, it really creates the right space. It really creates the right space for people to have those conversations. And then when it's facilitated in the right way, and when we have the right people there, it's really beautiful how you can see people just really transformed and changed.
That's such a different angle to what I hear many people telling me about the ice baths and the Wim Hof Method, which is more about, it's really good for the body, it's really healthy, and I reversed this or that, that was physically, but
yeah, I can talk about all that too.
Yeah, but the question that I would raise is like, so what comes first, the body or the mind? Is it both? And probably I would probably swing towards, it's probably the mind that actually let go first, and that really needed that ignition of going in a different way.
It's a great question, yeah.
Right?
And one thing that I often see with the sort of body mind or body head sort of analogy is that when we do have an overwhelming situation, right, coming back to those things, when we do have something that we sometimes can't process, when we need the little tools that we're talking about here, right? Sometimes it might not work for you to then sit down and do 20 minutes of meditation. I mean, that's the last thing I want to do. When I'm in a fight-flight state, or even worse, when I'm in a freeze state, it doesn't work for me to say, okay, now I'm going to sit here and I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths and I'm going to repeat my mantra, because that's my head telling my body to switch off.
With freeze state, by the way, you means like that you don't know what to do and how to process stuff?
Okay, so if we're looking at arousal in general, if we're looking at sort of the nervous system states, it first shoots us into fight-flight, right? Where it's either I'm going to engage with the situation or I'm going to flee from it, right? And it sometimes depends on your family dynamic that you grew up in, which one you're more and get inclined to gear towards. Like I have a fight dynamic because my older brother had a flight dynamic, right? So I stepped in that way, and that's quite usual. And that's sort of the way that we move through the day, and there's nothing wrong with it. We use it for work, and even the flow state sometimes is related to some of this sort of fight-flight sort of areas where we're just a bit more active. But there's another layer to it, which is known as the freeze state, and this one really comes from like more of a reptilian side of the brain. It's more of an evolutionary process where it's actually when arousal goes too high. So say there's so much of a dangerous scenario going on, right? Or there's so much threat, or there's something that's so overwhelming to us that causes so much arrival, we tend to actually disengage. So instead of going into real high state of fight, flight, when that doesn't work anymore, we actually switch off. And this would look like in the evolutionary process, it would look like feigning death. So it would look like actually just going out of the body, disassociating, and not being there at all, right? And it's a brilliant process because it allows us to not feel pain. It allows us to not store memory. It allows us to not be present in those really dangerous situations. And so, this shows up again with the PTSD, where say you are in the military and there's this crazy thing happening and there's bombs going off. Oftentimes, you just won't be there.
Wow.
Your mind will leave the body, and it's a survival mechanism, right? You go into this freeze mode, and so people will say, well, I could have done more. I could have helped him. I could have been there, and they feel guilty about it. But the truth is you couldn't. Your body was so brilliant that it left the building in order for you not to feel the pain and not to process the emotion and not to store that whilst you were in that situation.
Wow.
Right? And the same happens with rape, where the people say, I could have fought back. Why didn't I fight back? And you couldn't. Your body was brilliant. It actually shut off. And you won't remember a lot of those moments and a lot of those things. So that's the freeze state. And what happens a lot with people with trauma, or actually with all of us, because again, I think we all carry trauma, is that we go into that freeze state during the day. Right, we go into that freeze state at different moments. I go into that freeze state when particularly like a male dominant figure will raise his voice to me. It's something that I've associated with that from my childhood that immediately shoots me back there, right? And it's a very unhealthy state to be because digestion doesn't work in those states. Blood doesn't flow to the right places in the brain, so you don't have good cognitive function. And all these things don't work the right way. You're purely surviving. Same in the fight-flight. It's good for a little while, but it's not where you want to live from. It's not where you build honest connection with other humans, and it's not where you have a restorative function for the body. Regenerative processes don't work. So you want to be in that opposite, that parasympathetic, that calm state. So back to breathing and the practices, they can help us regulate that process. So they are little tools that we can use to get out of that fight-flight scenario, or out of that freeze scenario, even worse, and just back down into that parasympathetic place, where we can then have a little bit more access to self-regulation and to these functions. So I think that's oftentimes the first step, that we teach people how this works and paint a bit of a picture for them, because that really helped me a lot to just see this on a bit of a diagram and a graph and just notice, so that's what happens. And so that's why I do that. And so that's why this doesn't work. And it really explained a lot. And then also it motivated me to use some of the tools to learn to regulate some of these functions. So we teach people this. And it helps them. I don't know how we started this original conversation anymore.
I can see sort of the red thread there. So, you were saying, look, I did that and I was in freeze. And then I would go into the freezer. Did you say freezer room? Did I actually hear freezer room?
So I've got a chest freezer
Yeah.
at home. Okay,
Yeah.
we're talking about the cryotherapy. Yeah, so cryotherapy, there's different ways of doing it. And you have these sort of chambers that are becoming really popular where they're almost like a full body sort of capsule and your head's out of it and it takes you about 2 minutes, 3 minutes to be in there, and they sort of freeze your body and they'll distract you and they'll dance you around a bit and you get out of there without even knowing it. But there's also different ones. The one that I did, they're actually big freezers. So that's sort of the freezers that you have in these like big kitchen facilities that you can walk into. So walk-in freezers. And you walk into one that's minus 90 degrees air temperature for 30 seconds. And then there's a door that opens into the big one, which is minus 125, I think it was.
Wow.
And they have sort of the music playing on ice, baby. And the first breath you take, the whole room just fogs up immediately. And you're just standing there and it was so overwhelming for me. This was one of the first experiences with it that I had. I'd done some cold exposure bouts in the past as a teenager and as a kid, but this was wow, and you're wearing these Ugg boots and this big glove in your body. And it's like, okay, so now I have to actually deal with it because this is going to take 2.5 minutes. But what happened to me initially was that it shot me back into one of those states. I don't know exactly what happened, but I started crying. I got into my body. I got really into my body and I felt again. And I just remember the tears freezing on my face and that thing and being like, wow, there's something I have to deal with here, right? And this is somehow helping me. And then when I got out of that freezer, this is the interesting thing about cold exposure, it releases a bunch of endorphins. Similar to sauna use, it releases some of that dynorphin too. So all these feel-good hormones get released. And so I remember that was actually me feeling good. And that had been quite a while that I felt good and that I felt in my body. And then they have little rebounder trampolines. So you're just bouncing around and you can bounce up to the walls and you can throw things at each other. And I was like, wow, I'm here again. I'm home again, is what it felt like. I'm in my body again. And it signaled that feeling in me like, I got to seek this out. I got to do this. I got to do more of this. Yeah.
Wow. So and then you kept just going back and experience the cold and experience your emotions, I guess.
Yeah. Well, then I learned that there was somewhat of a method to the madness, and that this guy Wim Hof in the Netherlands,
who's Dutch as well, right?
Yeah. And he grew up quite close to where I grew up, and he'd been doing this for about 40 years. So he was known for going into the Amsterdam canals in midwinter when it's ice cold, and they're not pretty clean canals. It's sort of quite a weird thing to do, but he would go even at night. He would go and have his own personal moment, and he was dealing with his own personal strategies at the time too. So he would walk to the canals and he would do, just by himself, not tell anybody, he would do 10 minutes in the canals and he would sit there and he would hold his breath in this ice cold water, and it must have had a similar effect on him, I figured, because it must have really built some sort of anti-fragility and resilience within him, and also bring him into his body. And I resonated with his story and with his ethos. And he was someone that didn't exactly fit into the system, as he may say, and always kind of took his own path. And he'd been scrutinized quite heavily in the Netherlands and made fun of as well.
Oh, really?
In the early days.
In the early days,
Yeah, absolutely. But it made sense to me. It really did. And then that breathing technique that my brother showed me at the time after this cryotherapy, which was, we didn't really understand it, but it was supposed to help me deal with the cold. It was supposed to make it easier. It's kind of what we believed. It's like, no, this is how you do it. Yeah. It's like, okay, that makes sense. But what it really did to me is that it shut off all the voices, and then again brought me like deep into my body, and even into this place where I felt connected to much more than myself. And I was seeing lights, and I was just having this really deep feeling of well-being, I think was the result of it. I went through a whole process in that breathing. I don't even remember all of it, but towards the end, there was calm and there was peace. And it made me realize, like, okay, it is available for me. I can get here, right? And I just come back from India, actually, where I'd been, studying yoga and doing all these meditation courses. And I can honestly say that I tried, but I didn't reach that state. In the months that I was there, and in the things that happened to me that might have, disconnected me from that in the first place. But in just that simple breathing session, which was about 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, I got there. Wow. And I've been going there every single day since then. Yeah. And I really have. So it's become sort of my personal daily meditation practice is really what it is. It's doing this breath walk. And it was without even knowing about all the health benefits at the time. I knew it made sense to me as a freediver. Like, okay, this might help me with some of these performance aspects, and it might build some more red blood cells and, oxygen carrying capacity and little things like that. I was like, yeah, I get it, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because it makes me feel good. Yeah. And I think that's the greater motivation about this. That's the
best motivator, right?
That's what keeps you coming back.
Yeah.
So I tell that to people these days too. I can explain to you for hours about how this works, but you won't do it because of that. Right. If I tell you do this breathing technique right now, which is going to build your, it's going to build your breathing muscles, do this thing.
Yeah.
It takes 20 minutes, you lay on the floor, you do it, and it's boring. There's a good chance you won't be doing it tomorrow morning.
That's it.
But if I show you this breathing technique, and give you just a little bit of information and
Yes.
background, and you'll feel great, tomorrow morning you're onto it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of where that journey begins. And it's a journey of self-inquiry. And then throughout that process, you can learn a lot about your respiratory system. And it will improve, right? With little tweaks and little bits of pieces of information, you will become a better breather.
Yeah.
And it will make you a better human, I believe. It will improve your quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess society has changed over time from personalities that either shut down and, won't deal with things. And I think that's, I'm sure, the most common thing that happened. And then the people who are really diligent and would go and study the ascended masters, whatever, to find tools to deal with it. They exist, but they're a particular personality type. They're the people that, that don't mind doing boring tasks because they just like to follow a procedure. But if you think about the modern, like our generation, it's a very different generation because there is so much choice, so much is available that in order to get people to that stage, there wouldn't be the pain that drives people to go, well, they might try the psychotherapist or so on, so they will try things. But if it doesn't show results, I think it's nowadays way more likely that people just say, well, this is not for me. Whereas back in the days, like, well, I go to the doctor. It doesn't help, but, that's what you do. And nowadays it's more like people say, well, this is awesome. I will do it again. There's certainly, I think there's just a change in how humans sort of are. They're just freer. And therefore, they make the choice based on how do I actually feel, which is a much better indicator, I guess, yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really interesting point. It's a really interesting point you bring up because it kind of takes us to the next thing, which is the cold exposure. Because in modern society, and especially today's world, compared to even one generation before us, it's much easier out there.
Yes.
And we're very inclined to just doing things that feel good all day. And we have those options available. We can just chase dopamine hits all day long. We can really just be on Instagram and we can just eat chocolate and I do those things. Don't get me wrong, but it's really very available for us to do those things constantly and not seek out those other sides. And I think that the people that you mentioned, those seekers, the people that have that sort of greater level of inquiry or that they traditionally, I think they would actually seek out suffering. Right? And that comes back from sort of the Buddhist days where this philosophy that all life is suffering, right? And so the aesthetic, the person that would go out, the original yogi, would suffer all day long and would choose suffering so that then life couldn't touch them. And I think that's one thing that maybe Wim Hof has touched on in his own personal practice too, is he didn't do the easy things. He actually went out and sought out the difficult things because he wasn't enjoying that cold exposure. I think he was enjoying some of the benefits of it, but not those moments. It's not like it was a pleasurable thing for him. It wasn't like watching TV and watching Netflix. No, it's a quite difficult thing to do and people making fun of you and those things. But I think it's a bit of that original yogi route where you're seeking out that suffering, right? And you're putting yourself into those situations. And so that's interesting then, because with the breath work, you might actually get some of those dopamine hits that we're talking about, and the brain will actually release some of those cannabinoids and some of those endorphins and those things that are associated with well-being. But with the cold exposure, you do have to do it. It's not something that's easy, And the breathing, you could actually say the same. You do have to do it every day. You do need a level of discipline. You do need a level of commitment, which is actually also a big part of the method, to get the benefits out of this, right? And so it does require a certain type of person to go and just do that every day. It does require that level of, I don't know, maybe it's that motivation, desperation thing again, where why do you keep coming back to this and why do you do this? Yeah. Because it's much easier to just take a couple of pills, right? One pill a day and then your life's easy. Or you just go and drink a beer or nothing wrong with any of those things in essence. Yeah. But it's different choices. Yeah. And Wim Hof has certainly made some of those more difficult choices, I think. And his method sort of implies that that's good. Try some of those things.
So in your courses, do you see more people coming because they're looking for something that sort of sorts them out and puts them on a track of, I feel healthy within myself, and by the sounds of it, it's more the mind? Or is there still more the movement? Because often that comes from the people who are sort of understanding the physiology of the body and say, oh, I want to increase my performance. And by accident, they actually realize, oh, I had a trauma as well. And, that got dealt with it automatically. Like, is it one more than the other at the moment?
I think there's a bit of both, and it's always hard to sort of describe my audience or my clients or such. But what I think is an interesting experiment is to look at the people that sort of come on the journey with me, right? Because I do lots of these seminars. I've spoken to more than 5,000 people last year, I think, with all the big events and things like that. But I look at my retreats and the people that sort of trust it and that feel what I'm about, right? And that's why they come. That's why they sign up in the end. And that's sort of the real sort of niche group of people, because I work with CrossFit athletes. I work with, you know, yoga teachers and yoga students. I work with an elderly population. I work with teenagers. I work with this whole big range of people, and they all have their own reasons for trying it and for doing these things. But the people that stick to it, that really continue that journey, I think are people that are really willing to work on themselves. That's the one common denominator. They're people that are, I mean, that's quite a unique thing, I think, in our society, is that you're willing to spend, you know, X amount of money and time purely on the focus of I'm going to better myself.
Yes.
Like that's a small percent of people. Like to us, it's no doubt about it. I spend, if I look at my expenses, it's all going into my personal development in the end, you know. It's all upgrades. Like none of it's going to some of the other things. But that's a very small percentage of people. The people that are actually willing to say like, hey, I could be a bit better. And I'm going to spend, you know, $120 to go see this guy and to learn this technique and just to better my life a little bit, you know. And what brought them there in the first place is, I think, a different question.
Suffering.
Maybe suffering.
Yeah. It's a good thing sometimes to actually get you motivated. I certainly know for myself that, you know, things went not so well in my early years, and they always eventually really accelerated and, you know, elevated me into a different way of looking at the world, because I needed to overcome it. As long as there's a drive to wanting to do that, and by the sounds of it, there are more and more people who really are not willing to not be happy. Therefore, they will seek out ways to be happier. Hey.
Yeah. I resonate. and I hear this thrown around quite a bit, and people are like, oh, I'm very good at suffering. You know, that's my talent. And I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm really not. I was always very terrible at suffering. I was unable to let a situation that made me suffer last. That's why I couldn't stay in those cool situations. And that's why I've been moving around and doing all these different things and really actively seeking out different ways, because I actually couldn't deal with having that low quality of life and suffering throughout my days. I just couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
And not even for weeks. I was just out. And this is why I've jumped to so many different places and situations in my life, because when it wasn't good, I was gone. And I see many people that, you know, some of the menial jobs that I used to do when I was 16 years old, scaffolding and working in like night shift jobs and situations like that in the Netherlands. And it's not always pretty, you know, some of those sort of blue collar type places. And I'd meet people that had been working there for 25 years, proudly. You know, I've been driving this forklift for 26 years, and something inside me died when they said that. And I was like, I cannot. I cannot. And I was gone the next day.
Yeah. No, that's exactly. I remember being at school and facing 1 year more at school, and then I would be one of them. And that's when I became pretty good at school, because I needed to find something, and for me the way was going to another school. So, you know, so I repeated voluntarily just to get better at school, and then I could go to another school, have another 3 years at school, because it was definitely, well, for me that was the best out of the choices that there were. Yeah. And then eventually, I guess, you know, finding my path, but.
And I don't mean to say with it that, you know, we chose a better path or anything like that.
Oh, no, but you just want that work for me. You know?
I agree. And I think that's a choice that we can make, is like honestly look at what you do and why you're there, and honestly decide, like, is this the best thing for me right now?
Yeah, no, that wasn't meant just mentally, because if I think about, well, you know, I always reference my gran, who was a really, really simple person. Like, honestly, not very bright, but the happiest person that I ever knew, because she was just happy with what she had, you know. Like, it was, for her, was about, you know, having friends over and drinking cappuccino. I mean, you know, she wasn't gossiping, but she was just seeing always the positive thing. And that reminds me on, like, it's not about what you do really, but it's the attitude to what you do. And I've seen really happy people being in blue collar jobs or having new job. It doesn't really matter, you know, but I know for me it was just, I was looking for, I guess, extension and to exposure, and I think especially younger people would look for that, you know, and would love to see, you know, other countries, and, you know, have a good challenge and grow with it. So
beautiful. My mom keeps telling me this quote, and she tells it to me like every year when she calls me, "No, you're here now, you're doing this now, you're in this situation now." It's like, well, happiness is actually desiring what you've already got. And, you know, in the beginning I was like, nah. No, you know, after like 7 years of that, I'm a bit like, maybe there's some truth to that. But yeah, if anything, I like speaking at schools and sort of trying to work more with teenagers and things like that. And I think it's not about what you say, but it's about kind of the example that you show up as, and to say, this is what I did, and this is also possible. This is also a way, and this is also a trajectory, and just showing that. I think that's quite meaningful, right?
So you've seen a big increase of interest in the whole Wim Hof method and breathing techniques and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. And with breathing in general as well, there's, it's not a new thing. And Wim Hof is certainly not the inventor of breather. It's been about for a very long time. And there's many more techniques that are more in-depth and more precise and that will suit way better for certain conditions. But they're not as appealing a lot of the times. And they were kind of like a niche, almost underground thing that you really have to seek out if you had a specific condition, right? Like if you were suffering with asthma and you were open to look for alternative methods, you might stumble upon some of these things, right? There's sort of a Russian scientist that developed some things in the 60s, and there's these esoteric, like Indian mystics that were developing some of these breathwork techniques that would, back in the 70s as well. But these things were very out there at the time. And I think what I've seen happening and what I've sort of felt and what I've been a part of and what I'm very grateful for is how Wim Hof has made it. He's almost made it sexy. He's come in with this attitude of like, no, it's about being a better human, and it's what can you do? And here's a guy that climbed Mount Everest in a pair of shorts, and you're looking at it, and he looks like average Joe too. He's not like some guru sort of makeup. He's just out there, and he's saying these things, and he's made it really accessible. And he's made people take the first step to looking at the breath, right, and to experimenting with these techniques and to trying this out. And then it's this beautiful push and this flow into different breathwork techniques. So we're seeing different techniques pop up all over the place at the moment, and we're seeing people interested in the breath and in the massive potential that it really has. And so the respiratory system is often very overlooked by all performers and by all people that are just looking for how to human. Really, it's something that you can't really overlook if you're looking really to be your best self. It's a big part of the equation. It's a big puzzle piece because oxygen is the currency of life, right? And how we process that is how we create energy, like at its fundamental basis. That's metabolism for you right there. So it's important to look at that process. And I think what we're seeing with Wim Hof is that he's so popular, and he's doing these podcasts, and he's doing these interviews, and he's doing these massive movies and screenings, and everybody's seeing it. You can't miss him. Everybody knows the name by now. Yeah. And he's pulling attention into the breath, which is amazing. So he's directing people towards this tool, this medium, right? And what they do with it is their own choice. But definitely over the the method has only been around since like 2013, 2014. That it's actually sort of gotten formulated. That's about 5 years now, and it's just exploded.
Wow.
And it's going to keep going. We're not stopping.
Are there some things that people should look out for? I'm having been in an experimental state for quite a while myself, and, so many different modalities, so many different diets and so on. I certainly know now that some things that I was doing was not particularly good for my body. And yes, got my learning out of it, and now I'm smarter. That's great. Yeah. But, like some pitfalls was something that, from the outside certainly looks very extreme of, having an ice bath or, breathing in a particular way, especially if it's not guided by a Wim Hof instructor. Like, what are the things that people should look out for? Also bodily symptoms that they should look out for to just make sure that they don't, permanently damage themselves?
Yeah. It's actually relatively safe, surprisingly
enough,
to most people, because it looks extreme, and part of the charm of it is that it looks extreme. But it's actually very safe if you do it in a safe and controlled environment. So as long as you feel supported and you feel safe where you're doing it, and always have someone looking out for you with these ice bath type situations. Like, it's just not a situation that you want to get yourself in alone if you're not experienced with it, right? Just do it together with other people. It also increases the fun there. I think that's a good sort of rule that you can have. And with the breathing, the only real rule and the only real danger is doing it near water, or just in circumstances where, you passing out, which won't really happen in general, but it's a possibility. Yeah. It's always a possibility. Would have very negative consequences. And so
when you fall into the water while you pass out. Yeah.
Well, let's say, you're driving or you're doing these things. Yes, and people actually will do this. People, don't have so much compressed into their day. They're like, I'm going to combine my Wim Hof method with hanging up the laundry. So I put 2 flies in one stone. And it's like, well, maybe not. Right? That's kind of missing the point there. But yeah, there have been accidents, and there have been some very serious consequences of people, looking at these videos and then going, I can swim under ice. And it's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. It's a very different process, very different practice. And so the number one rule of freediving is never, ever hyperventilate. Don't change the breathing in any way, shape, or form. Whereas the number one rule of the Wim Hof method is not near water. So that's the big one. Don't do this. Don't think that you can hold your breath and now swim underwater for a long time, because you can't. It's a trick. And so that's the one danger that people should be very considerate of.
Yeah.
But if you're practicing the method and you're doing it at home, and it will work the best way if you're as relaxed as possible. So find a nice comfortable position, seated or laying down. Play one of those YouTube videos. You can play one of my guided recordings too, and just give it a try, and nothing can go wrong. You'll have an experience, and you get the most out of it if you do it in that setting too. So if you just do it in a calm, controlled place where you're in control of the environment, right? Nobody's going to come disturb you, and there's no sense of panic. And same with the cold exposure. Do it in a place where you feel safe and you feel like you're in control to a certain extent.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Awesome. You're known as a biohacker as well, whether you label yourself like that or not, you are. And you probably use quite a few different methods that come out of, or that are nowadays labeled like that. They might have been much older, but now they're under the biohacking label. What would be your routine? What would you say would be a very typical routine that you would have on a daily basis that would probably also fall into that? It doesn't actually matter. Like, what is your routine?
Yeah, good question. And it changes a lot. So I might listen to this in a few months and go like, oh my God, that's not at all what I'm about. But because for a long time, when I sort of did get into that biohacking sphere, it was just compounding things upon each other. So it was like, oh, well, I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I'll do this, and then I'll do this, and then I get a bit of this, and then I get a bit of this. And before I know, I was just a taskmaster on myself, cracking the whip and trying to get 30 things done in the morning. Yeah. And they were all positive things, like going out, getting sunlight, swimming in the ocean, doing my ice bath, getting in the sauna, doing some push-up, doing movement, all these things, right? But it was just becoming too much, and it was, I mean, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So that was a personality trait for me too. And what I find now is that I actually give myself quite a bit of space. That's what I try to do. I actually try and just slow things down. And to me, biohacking, it really just means connecting to nature. That's the big thing for me, right? And so from everything I learn about self-regulation and about these different states, is that it actually all comes back down to living in harmony with nature. Right. And that's where health lies for me. So that's what I seek out. So oftentimes it looks like me trying to wake up at a natural rhythm. So not having any alarms in place, not having anything extreme. And ideally that is when the sun comes up, right? And so when I rise, and then I also try to just get out and put my feet on the grass. I've got a little patch of grass at home, and I just kind of put my feet on there, and I try and get my eyes into that sunlight. Yeah. Which helps reset your circadian rhythm, right? So that's kind of the first thing I try to do every single morning. And then I kind of try to check in as to what I feel like. And oftentimes it's still just me going, I have to go to yoga, have to go to a workout otherwise. But I try to just check in and be like, hey, what do you want, body? Like, what are you feeling like? And sometimes it's to swim in the ocean. It's one that I really love. I live in Sydney. And the ocean's beautiful. It's really amazing. And the temperature's nice and cold now. It's like 14 degrees. So doing that swim in the morning, then doing somewhat of a practice of hot yoga and movement is one thing that I really love too. I've had a yoga practice for about 5 years now. I try and do that every day and stretch and move my body in different ways. And then it's usually ice bath time. So that usually comes around sort of 8:30, 9 a.m. is when I face the ice bath. And so I have that at home. I have a chest freezer set up. Cool. That's pretty much permanently at sort of between 1 and 6 degrees. It doesn't really matter. But it's always there. And that's sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's confronting too, because like, well, why don't you want to get in today? It's right there, it's the thing. So I do try and do it every single day. And I just try and be honest with myself when I'm doing it. And I just try and check in and be like, what are your fears right now? What are you resistant about? And why are you doing this? Honestly, like, is it just for the sake of doing it, or is there actually something that you're looking for, some intention that you have? Then I'll bounce around a bit on my rebounder, ideally, or I'll do some of these movements, some of these flows, or sometimes not. Sometimes I just rush into the day. But ideally, I take a bit of time just to warm myself up. And I'm a big fan of cacao too, like we're having here. So ice baths and cacao are lately have been a daily occurrence. Try not to drink coffee, so the cacao really does that for me. And then the day begins, right? And it kind of flows in whatever way. And I try to put pockets, moments into the day where I do check in. And and it doesn't always happen. I sometimes go into a bit of that fight flight, or I go into a bit of that, where I'm just overly focused, or I end up sitting down for 2 hours, which is not ideal, But I try and check in with my breathing and use some of these basic breathing practices that I have. So use some of the things like box breathing and therapeutic zone of breathing, where you're just counting breaths and you're just using a certain rate of breathing. And I've got quite a few different tricks up my sleeve that I can use to sort of calm myself down. And sometimes it's actually speed myself up. So sometimes I actually want a bit more energy, or I want a bit more sort of focus or activation, and I can use the breath for that. So I try and check in at least 5 to 10 times throughout the day and just kind of use that tool. right? And then it's all about winding down, and there's a whole different set of practices to do that. But yeah, trying to be in bed again at a natural time, and the basic stuff: no screens, basic sleep hygiene. I do have a couple of tools. I do use the sauna pretty much every single day. Unfortunately, I don't have one at home yet, so I go to a public Finnish sauna. That's about it. And then, but the real basis of that, I think, is not so much that I'm trying to squeeze in all these things. It's really trying to be honest with myself, but then working on regulating myself through the day. So if I look at it at that chart that I described earlier, where we're going from parasympathetic into fight-flight, and I'd like to have a bit of movement in that chart during the day. So I'd like to, I think for a lot of people it looks like waking up, and this is quite an extreme thing that, sometimes I'm a victim of that too, where you wake up and immediately you grab Instagram, right? And then there's just no way. Like, I'm sorry, that's just going to bump up reactivity throughout the day, throughout life, and it's just not going to work for you. And your brain's hijacked immediately. And so that sets you up for this fight-flight right away. And then, then you get the coffee, which kind of does the same thing. Sorry, people take coffee very personally, but it
do
can
they?
be good.
Okay.
I get into trouble for this a lot. It can be good, but it raises a bit of that fight-flight. It puts a bit of adrenals into the equation, and it gets you a bit of cortisol, a bit activated, a bit of stress, and then you run into work and you get on the phone and people start calling you, and so you get up into this fight-flight scenario, and you just stay there all day, and then hopefully towards the end of the day you kind of have something that can wind you down. And some people don't. Some people fall asleep with their phone in hand again. I mean,
wow,
I'm very far away from that, but well. Not necessarily, but at least it's not me anymore. Like, I feel disconnected from that now. I can't even picture that anymore, that I'm doing it to myself. Or in the evening, I'm still sort of on that phone, and then I go to bed, and it's a couple of hours of sleep, which might not even be real sleep. Like, I don't know what happens when you live like that. So I try and avoid that. I try and avoid having that constant peak of that fight-flight, so that it looks a bit more like waking up and just being in that calm state for a bit, then getting some of that fight-flight, because work's got to be done. I got to do some focus, and I got to do a workout, and I got to move, and there's fun stuff that you can do too. There's room for play. But then also bringing myself back down, say when lunchtime comes, getting some of that access to that parasympathetic nervous system, and little facts there are that, saliva production and all digestive function, like from anything from that sort of enzyme creation in the mouth to peristalsis, it doesn't work when you're in fight-flight. And that's, so I used to have a lot of digestive problems. When I was always in that state, when I didn't give myself the opportunity to then calm down before eating, right? And breathing helps me do that. It's kind of what I'm trying to get to. So I use the breathing just to have me go down into that parasympathetic. Yeah. And then in the afternoon, it can go up again, and I can go swing a kettlebell, or I can do some more work, or have fun, or hit the sauna, and then I'd like to get it down again and sort of start building some graphs through the day. And so I use some different measurement techniques to just check that out, and I'm sort of geek out on that stuff. And,
So some detailed question there: flight mode or switch off completely when you have your phone?
I go to the extent where at least I'd like to. I don't always do this, but I'd like to not even have it in the room. I always go in flight mode. I try and do this throughout the day a few times too, which is something I definitely need to work on a bit more. But in the evening, definitely on flight mode. And then ideally, I hear a lot of people talk about this, where they have like external charging stations, for the whole family, and everybody in the evening just puts the phone into the basket in the living room, and it stays there, and in the morning you can grab it again. And I love that idea, because it's not in the bedroom. So for me, if it's in the bedroom, if it's nearby, it's just eating up my willpower muscle, because it's just me having to then look at it and having to make the decision of going, oh no, I'm not going to take it. And you only have so much of that willpower available. So I kind of just like to avoid situations like that. That's why I don't have sugar in the house too. It's because, well, maybe, and probably not, but maybe I'll be able to resist it. But then I that's going to just take effort, and I don't want to make that decision.
I used to be a house sitter, and whenever I would go to other people's house, I would binge eat everything that was unhealthy.
I'm so guilty of that.
That was nothing left that was unhealthy, or that I would perceive as unhealthy and tempting, and then I would have a good routine from then onwards. But to be honest, I was actually always looking forward to the first week, because I would get all the cookies and all the other things until they're gone.
Yeah, and they're like, help yourself to anything, and I mean it in the best of ways. But then they come home and they're like, you ate everything.
Yeah. Yep. You're saying that sometimes it's hard to get into the ice bath. Is it similar to jumping into the cold ocean, which is afterwards you always feel good?
I think that's so true.
Yeah.
That's definitely the case, and that in the end, that's what's going to keep you coming back. Like, you do feel great afterwards.
Yeah.
It's really invigorating, and it also releases adrenaline, which is quite an interesting one.
Okay.
Adrenaline is a very interesting hormone. It's very complex actually, but it's related to dopamine, and also one thing it does is it shuts off a lot of different processes. So one thing that happens with adrenaline is that it kind of overrides the stress response. So it overrides that cortisol burst. So it will temporarily sort of reduce cortisol levels, which that's the kind of the nasty one, right? That's the one that's the constant stress in the background, the builder that we want to get away from. And also adrenaline's been used as a vasodilator, so it opens up veins, kind of like the sauna.
Yeah, similar like an infrared sauna.
So if you do like an asthma. Traditional asthma medicine is actually adrenaline. That's what the buffer is. That's what they have in there. Yeah, but also it's been used as treatment for ADD. And coming back, this is one thing I'm working on a lot, and I definitely need a lot of work with is focus. Right, so being able to just have consistent bouts of focus and staying on topic, and not getting creative and distracted like we can do in conversations like this. But it's great. But sometimes in daily life, it's not great, right? With some of the tasks, and I find that doing that ice bath and releasing some of that adrenaline really helps me focus. So it gets me in the zone. It's one of the things that I also keep coming back to it for.
So adrenaline would be probably would your body create adrenaline and release that when you do extreme sports? Would there be because I'm just thinking about there's certain adrenaline junkies, and often there is some correlation between hyperactive people and so on. Is that actually their way to finding their balance by
that's a really good question, and I've had that before, and I've also had people tell me, it makes sense now. It makes sense why I sought out all these crazy experiences like motorbike racing, because in a way it kind of balanced me out, and I go, wow. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll be completely honest. It's way out of my pay grade. But I have studied adrenaline to a certain extent, because it's a very big topic in Wim Hof Method, because the breathing method also releases adrenaline. And that was actually the one thing that was able to override Wim's immune system in that original experiment, right? Where the classic one where Wim showed that he was able to fight off an endotoxia, right? So he was able to let E. coli pass through his body sort of without having an inflammatory response to it. So he was able to control his immune system at will. And not so much because he was activating mind power. I mean, partially it was the belief that he was able to do it, and the focus, the level of focus that he applied to it. But what it showed in the results was that his breathing method actually released a bit of adrenaline, noradrenaline, right? And that would temporarily subdue the immune system slightly, which is what releases inflammation. Right? Wow. So he was able to sort of temporarily shut off his immune system by using this breathing technique, which in the long pause released adrenaline, noradrenaline, into the body. Now, they're different things, adrenaline and noradrenaline. They're actually epinephrine and norepinephrine. Mm-hmm. So adrenaline and epinephrine is the same thing, and norepinephrine and noradrenaline, it's the same thing. It's because of this Japanese guy who actually invented adrenaline, and he sold it. So he sold it as his company was called, Adrenaline. That's what he coined it as.
No way. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Yeah, he also. He also imported cherry blossoms to the United States for the first time, and he also made his own whiskey, which he fermented in like the traditional Japanese way, which became very famous. Same guy, like Tamazaki something.
Yeah, really?
The guy who invented adrenaline.
Right.
He made a lot of money on it, and then someone else ended up winning the Nobel Prize for it. I think a German guy.
Oh, okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
But he sold it as a therapeutic thing. So it was a medicine almost for people. So adrenaline has these really interesting implications. Again, it comes back to that asthma where it then vasodilates and opens up certain things. And we also know the EpiPens, so epi as in for epinephrine, adrenaline shot to the heart or to anywhere really, which then also blocks certain functions, and it releases a shot of adrenaline, which is very useful for certain people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Fascinating,
yeah. And I've asked myself that question that you originally posed before I took it off on a big tangent.
No.
About, does adrenaline then temporarily, create states of well-being? And do people use it unconsciously in their bouts of seeking out extreme sports and doing all these kind of crazy situations, whether they're actually hooked on adrenaline in a way? I like to think yes. How it plays out physiologically, I can't really answer.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of other things in your routine. One is the Rebounders. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to Rebounders. Are you more like a metal spring guy or more like a bungee guy? Because I definitely have my preference.
Man, I'm an eBay guy, to be honest.
eBay?
I went on eBay, typed in Rebounder. I just got one that was affordable.
Yeah.
I remember when I first got introduced to it, this was when I was working on a health retreat in Indonesia. And she had a particular brand of rebounder that was used by NASA, and this was the whole story about how the rebounder came into, its place and its existence,
and
how it would, restructure the body from that gravity point of view. And she had the really fancy one, and I got into it, and I loved it. I loved the story behind it too. Whereas I didn't really research which one I was going to get, so I just bought one. Metal springs, small one, but. So I learned this at the cryotherapy. I mentioned this earlier, but this is where I saw it, where they had this cryotherapy, and then they had this kind of, it was actually quite fun. They had all these big balls that you could kick around after you come out of the cryotherapy thing. It's this massive kind of exercise balls that you could play with, and you could kick, and you could hit with certain bouncy things. And then they had all these rebounders, and they had like a trail of them, so you could jump from rebounder to rebounder. And some actually went into the wall. And so you could have this, and it's awesome. You get out of the ice, and you kind of you're a bit, and you want to move. And then, obviously they do it because it's really good to rebound after cold exposure. It gets the lymphatic system moving, and it sort of starts to activate everything, and it also distracts you a bit from that process. And the kidneys also really like movement after cold exposure. So when you get those moving in any way, shape, or form, it's a good thing. So bouncing is great, but then I think that element of distraction where you're bouncing to certain destinations and you're able to do tricks and stuff, that was awesome. So I always associate it with that, ice and rebounder. And I know Tony Robbins, who's kind of the biggest sort of proponent of rebounders probably out there. He's the same with his cryotherapy and his ice bath. He's big into it, so I'm pretty sure he combines it too. Well, I haven't heard him say that, but I think so.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
So that's kind of what when I was designing my home setup, I was like, I need the ice and the rebounder. They're definitely a part of the equation.
Are there padded walls there in the cryo place? Are they soft somehow?
No, there was actually when you go to those big bouncing castles, those big bouncing places, there's they're kind of square. There's trampolines that I think they had those. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd like to go back there. It was actually quite a cool spot.
Yeah.
Cryotherapy is interesting. Yeah.
Last thing on your routine, it was really the first one. Sunlight. It's a really interesting one. I don't know why. I can't quite remember why I got into breatharianism and the interest on understanding that. I think it was just a fascination that I do and still believe that, and I did believe that your mind can create whatever it wants, including everything necessary for the body, or can run the body in a way that you don't need food, and then many other things maybe also not. And there was a connection to actually sun gazing, and of course everyone has to sort that out themselves and figure out whether that's safe or not. But I lived in Auckland at the time, and there are over 50 volcanoes in Auckland. None of them are active, but you can go on the very top and then watch the sunrise. And so I had, wherever I would house it, there was one or two in the close vicinity, so I would run up there. And yeah, it is really good. It's a beautiful city, really. And watch the sunrise. And I would start with 10 seconds, and then next day I would do 20 seconds. And then next day I would do 30 seconds of watching and looking into the sun. Up to just over half an hour is how long I would look into the sun. And it was never a problem. Other people would say, it hurts my eyes. And well, if you do it in the middle of the day, yes. And but when you train your eyes to that, as I said, not recommending it to anyone because it can be really harmful. But personally, it was the best thing ever. And I would lie in bed that night, remembering what it was like to see the sun coming up over the horizon, and the whole brain felt on fire and in a beautiful way and lit up. I could just the imagination and the memory of what happens when I see the first sunlight was so ingrained in me, because you have to do this for a long time to get up to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It was the best thing ever. And so I never got into breatharianism, but I do know that the energy that comes from the sun is something that I really relate to, and I'm saying many do. So my question to you, is there a particular reason? Is it just literally vitamin D level, or is it also sort of your rhythm in general, or why do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's a multitude of reasons. I test my blood markers, and vitamin D is chronically low, even though I do take it.
How often do you test, by the way?
I'm not that consistent with it.
But
at least every 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. When there was a time when I was a bit more intensive stuff, and it was every 3 months. Yeah. Yeah. But it was just chronically low, regardless of how much I would, use the little droplets or the little sprays and things. So you can always have more vitamin D, and that's the general advice that I've heard from smart enough people to say such things. It's like you don't even need to test people. Like everybody's low in vitamin D. You can just prescribe it immediately. So that was definitely one of my motivations, to just seek out more natural ways of creating that. And then when I was living in Bali, there was sort of an interesting conversation that I haven't really been able to trace, but I had this whole discussion with a Swedish guy about vitamin D farming. And he had developed this whole thing, and he said it was like a big community, and there was people that were doing vitamin D farming, and so they would get into ice, and then they would lay in the sun. Like literally, they would lay in ice all together in a big round pool, and then they would lay in the grass. And apparently, he had this story about it increases your vitamin D uptake by like 400%, and it kind of made sense to me. I was like, I don't understand it, but it makes sense. So I believed that, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get into the ice and I'm gonna rebound or do something in the sun afterwards. And I kind of kept that up ever since, and I've sort of chased it up. I haven't found any research that it actually works that way, but I still kind of uphold the myth. And one day I'll go to Sweden and seek them out.
Awesome.
So that was kind of the sun practice for me. And what I do now, I just got a red light therapy device.
Great.
So I got the Juve eventually, and I sort of use that as a daily practice too now, and it makes a lot of sense, because there's certain areas of your body that don't get enough sunlight, and then everything's meant to get sunlight at least, and so you can probably imagine which parts I'm talking about. But I put them in front of the red light device. And And if I think about it that way, like in living in Sydney most of the time, like I'm getting more red light than 95% of people, right? Because I'm using it in this external way, and because I'm going out in the morning, and with the sun gazing and the sunlight, I actually try and stay away from too much. So I try not to do anything that's between you could almost say like 10 and 4. I get little bits and pieces, like 10 minutes at a time. It just feels really good, but not much more. But then in the morning and in the afternoon, when those UV rays are meant to be that specific therapeutic sort of range, I try and get out. Because I couldn't stare into the sun at 1 o'clock. That would pretty hurt me, I think. But in the morning, it seems doable. And I think what you were saying really touched me in a way too, because I've had those moments when you watch the sunrise in the morning, and you really see it, and it really leaves this imprint on your consciousness almost. Like it's almost like it sticks with you through the day. And I'd like to think that then also takes through maybe into your dreams, or maybe into just the sleep realm, the unconscious, because it's processing the information eventually. So maybe it just sets you up for like a good night's dreaming. Was kind of what I got from that.
If not anything else, for sure. Hey, before I ask you the question that I ask everyone who comes onto the show, sunscreen and sunglasses, is that something that you do personally?
I don't know enough about it to give any form
of
advice,
but just in terms of what you personally do.
I tend to avoid sunscreen. I've got a couple of tattoos that I do use it on. I use a natural sort of blocker when I get longer into the sunlight.
Okay.
But apart from that, no. And so one of the theories that I'm sort of just testing on myself at the moment, maybe it's crazy, is that the red light device would potentially help you build more resistance to sunlight and to sunburns. So using light on yourself consistently will help your body be more able to deal with that. And I'm at the moment kind of openly testing that and putting that out there by not using sunscreen. Under the basis that I'd prefer to avoid things like that on my skin, if possible.
I'll let you know how we just released a new product which includes near infrared as well as red light therapy, and we're doing some tests on that and also some research, and it would be interesting to see. I know that like the preliminary research definitely shows that for men the testosterone levels really increase within 30 days, and that will be
probably
true for Juve.
50% of the motivation that I bought it.
Right, it's a good thing. Just for your bone density alone and what have you.
Absolutely. As for the sunglasses, I tend not to. Use them. I have my blue light blockers in the evening, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Whereas the sunglasses, I tend to avoid.
I'm a bit passionate about it. I read a couple of medical articles about the photo sensors in the eyes and how they actually regulate how strong you change color of your skin. So if you actually block the strength of the sunlight with your sunglasses, what I saw is that it means also that your skin is not as resilient to the sunlight. I'm sure officially no one should be advised to do that, but like for me personally, that's what I experienced, and ever since I haven't used sunglasses.
Yeah, it's wow. No, it is a sensitive topic. I think also, where we live here in Australia,
lots of melanoma.
It's certainly a problem. It's certainly an issue. So it's a very sensitive topic.
Yeah.
But open for honest discussion, at least an inquiry. It should be.
That's
so
it.
That's
well, you can experiment with your own body. You just shouldn't suggest it to anyone else, I guess. Yeah. Cool. Hey, just to round this up, even though I would love to talk and geek out on so many more little topics. What are the 3 things that get you out of bed in the morning? Well, you just described your routine, but sort of like the motivational ones that come up at the moment. I'm sure it changes over time.
Yeah, actually, light. I would say does come up. And part of the reason is if I don't use light, I have a harder time getting up. So when I get up, my brain's just going, seek out light. Seek out light, get out there. And I know that it helps me wake up better and helps to, it's almost the opposite of that phone effect where that reactivity, getting out into light seems to not do that. So seek out light is one of the first things that comes to mind. Build a day, and part of that is that I every evening, I've done this for quite a long time, is to write down exactly what I'm going to do the next day beforehand. So in the evening, when I get to bed, I will journal for a bit, and it usually just looks like me putting some affirmations, and some just telling myself I love myself, basically. And then writing out a very detailed plan. Like, I kind of need this for structure, so I go very detailed. Like, at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, you're doing X, Y, Z, and then at 7 you're doing this, and it's sort of, and it seems to just imprint this into my morning waking. And part of what I write down is actually you're going to wake up with a smile, and then you're going to have the most beautiful glass of water, and you're going to have this, you're going to feel amazing, and it's going to be awesome. And it's kind of when I wake up, I go, oh yeah, you did write that down, so go and do that. And then I think on a bigger level, it's how can I make an impact, and how can I improve my own life so that others can benefit from that too.
Yeah.
Right. How can I be better?
Yeah. What's your favorite thing at the moment to do?
My favorite thing to do. I really enjoy taking people into nature. Yeah. So I take lots of people into ice baths and into different breathing workshops and things like that. But taking people out into the snow is a really special adventure. So next year we're taking people to Japan, to New Zealand.
Very cool.
Places here in Australia. And just seeking it out. I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa myself, and I've got all these big things planned. So that's really a big motivator for me. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to sort of take it to the next level. And not that I'm a great guide or anything like that, but I just enjoy having that role where I take people into these places that I'm really passionate about. And just see the way that they respond to it.
Yeah, well, it's really infectious. If someone is so excited about something, that is a great guide. And last question, why do you think that humans and us exist?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd like to say, and I don't know if it's my opinion or if it's things that I've picked up along the way, but I'd like to say it does have something to do with love. And I think love has got something to do with potential. It says that God created the world for us because he saw the potential and he saw what could be, and he made that manifest. And I like to think that that's what we're all here to do, is to make our potential manifest and how we can bring that out in others, right? So it's about me seeing the potential in you and seeing the potential in the community and bringing that out, and that I think is love. I think that's Viktor Frankl, German, wrote a beautiful book, and he wrote about, about suffering, but how it all comes back to seeing potential in others and how to bring out love. And I thought that was quite a good definition.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you remember that book name?
Yeah, definitely. Man's Search for Meaning. Yes. Amazing, yeah. He created logotherapy in a concentration camp, and he wrote out, he kept it all in his mind, and he ended up using it as he almost became his own example of how the therapy could work, because he lived through, I think, about 3-4 years in a concentration camp, and the most imaginable horrors available to mankind, and he survived.
He counseled even his guards, hey? Did he not also he counseled other?
I think he became somewhat of a doctor, and ended up talking to people and helping people. But it's quite an incredible story.
Yeah,
thanks. The chance of the whole thing, right? And how openly he writes about it. That book really does continue to have an impact on me, I think. And I think he writes at some point in the book a definition for love, which is, it's to see the greater potential in others. Yeah. And to get out of your own way to help that come out, to show them, right? To be that mirror. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah, man, it was so good to have you here. I hope I see you again. I'm sure there's so much more that we can uncover or you can share. So thanks for making the time. Looking forward to see you again.
Absolutely, me
awesome.
too, man.